this blue thing here is supposed to be red, which means we're going to see some fun colors. But hey, we're all in Silicon Valley, and seeing a little color would be good for all of us. Anyway, here we go.
You're quite hostile.
I got a right to be hostile, man. My people been persecuted.
Afternoon, my name is Mike Monteiro. Some of you may have heard me talk before. It's nice to be speaking here in San Francisco. It's the middle of summer. It's a beautiful summer day. Flowers are blooming, the birds are singing, and I'm excited to be here talking to you about all the amazingly wonderful things that are happening in design right now. Problem is, there are so many interesting things happening in design right now that I had a little trouble making up my mind what to talk about. I thought maybe we could talk about design thinking. Design thinking is exciting. Then I remembered it doesn't actually mean anything because we already have a word for what we're calling this, and it's design. So let's move on. Then I thought, hey, maybe we could talk about personal projects. We could talk about following your bliss, lovingly crafting things, showing everyone how pure your fucking heart light is. Then I remembered that I'm not good looking enough to be on the cover of The Great Discontent, so let's move on. And then I thought, oh yeah, let's fucking talk about Pokemon. Let's all go outside and point our phones at things. It's a lot of fun unless you're black and the people call the cops on you for doing it, which is happening. But looking out here at the audience today, I don't think that's too much of a problem for anybody here. Ultimately, though, I decided I wanted to talk about something else entirely. Let's talk about Greenland. Sometime in the next 40 years, Greenland is going to melt. This is not a theory, this is a fact, causing the world's oceans to rise by 6 meters. Now, to put that in American, that's 20 feet. This looks great in blue, now it just looks like piss. So that's 20 feet of water, which means you're up to water on the second floor. To put this, to even more localize this in San Francisco terms, Dr. Weed is now underwater. But the United States, in its infinite wisdom, has a plan to spare us from this incoming disaster. We're just going to shoot everyone. And I think we're on target to do that before Greenland becomes a problem. Sooner on the horizon, we're doing our very best to violate our most sacred trust with the world and turning our backs on the very people who built this country. And then there's this testicle wart on the American consciousness. Wow, he looks great as a fucking Smurf. This is what it looks like when an entire country gets herpes. Don't laugh too hard, Oliver. There's a European strain. This is sad English, dude. And sometime in the next few years, Facebook may just accidentally release everyone's private information into the public sphere. And by the way, did you know you can buy things on Facebook now? Here's a dining room table. These are all actual things I found on Facebook in the last couple weeks. A wooden countertop. A can of Hawaiian Punch. Baby powder for $800. And an empty can of Mountain Dew. You notice something those photos have in common that's not listed in the titles. That's how people are hiding this shit. And if that's not enough, Silicon Valley may just lobby Congress to make women illegal. In which case, nothing in this talk will matter. So the fact that I'm standing up here talking and you're still very patiently sitting down there listening is either the most stupid or the most hopeful act I can imagine, or both. Either way, all of that stuff may happen, or it may not happen. But it's definitely beyond the realm of the possible and well into the realm of the probable. And it's happening because we didn't do what we could to stop it. More than that, it's happening because this is how we designed the world. We designed the combustion engine that led to global warming. We designed the guns that kill school children. We designed the shitty interfaces that don't protect our private information. We designed the religions that pit us against one another. And we designed the ballots that miselect presidents. Either by inaction or action, through fault or through ignorance, we have designed the world to behave exactly as it's behaving right now. These are our chickens coming home to roost. The world is as it is right now because we designed it this way. But on the very slimmest of margins, that we managed to survive the current garbage fire state of the world, the very slimmest of margins. This might be a good time to ask ourselves, how the hell did we get here? What our role was in getting here, and what our role will be in making sure we don't get here again. Now, I love being a designer. And most days it's a pretty humble craft we practice. Not unlike being a cobbler. And people come to you with a hole in their shoe, and you fix it. And they walk away feeling better. And then there's the rare day that you get to feel like a superhero. You design something. You design something that helps autistic kids learn how to read. Or you design a site that helps to collect money to get clean water for a small village that didn't have any. Or you get to design a site that helps to save bird habitats. Or you get to work with an amazing organization like Wikipedia. Those are great days. And because those days are so few and so far between, you treasure them. Because you realize that on those days, your work had an impact. You realize that because of something that you had a small part in, someone, and it might be someone you'll never meet, had a better day. And then you get greedy. Because those days, when you get to have an impact, those days feel so good that you want to have more of them. So you start looking for bigger problems to solve. And you start wondering whether a designer can be more than a cobbler in a workshop that fixes shoes. And you start wondering, well, what's causing the holes in the shoes? You start wondering if the problem isn't the shoes, but the road. Or you start wondering why people have to walk around so much. Are they walking away from something? Or you start wondering why some people have to get the same ratty pair of shoes resold every week, and some people have a new pair of shoes every time you look at them. And you start wondering about the context in which you do your work, and who you're doing it for, and who you're doing it to, and how that work affects the world. And you develop an awareness to context. And eventually, you develop an understanding that everything in the world is designed to work a certain way. And because you're a problem solver, you look at the world around you. and you see problems, and you start wondering if you can fix those problems. And if you start looking really closely, you might even see your fingerprints on some of those problems. And this, my dear beloved designers, and I love you all, is when designers start wondering if they can change the world. And that's great, because changing the world is really hot right now. The current environment in tech is all about telling you that you're changing the world. Come to Uber and change the world. Come work at Twitter and change the world and have swordfish for lunch. Come work at Airbnb, change the world. At this point, you would be a fool to take a job where you weren't being promised that you could change the world in some amazing way. So I did a search. I got curious. I did a search on SLIDESHARE for Change the World. There are currently, as of this writing, 2,950,483 results for Change the World on SLIDESHARE. Here's one, and I quote, Galileo Galilei, Mother Teresa, Bill Gates, Larry Page. These are just 4 of the people you look up to because of their significant contribution to the world. Can you be as influential as them? Yes. I think this is from a Zenefits recruitment deck, by the way. But can anybody change? Anybody here work at Zenefits? You enjoying your time off? Okay. But can anybody change the world? Conversation managers can change the world. And it turns out the reason it's easier to change the world now than it was then is because we have PowerPoint. If you really want to change the world, maybe some people are still on the fence about this thing. Revolution, hey, this looks promising. I wonder what they do. Yeah, it's analytics. 5.5 easy steps. Here's a tip. If you want to change the world, maybe settle on the amount of fucking steps it's going to take. It's either 5 or it's 6, but if you come at me with 5.5, I might start thinking you don't have all your shit worked out. My personal favorite, which works great in blue and yellow, I think this one just says go to the EU and have cocktails. This one is kind enough to tell you how they would change the world, but I'm pretty sure we already have that covered. And I'm pretty sure that Gandhi would be psyched to be part of the Killer Presentation series. And of course, once you mention Gandhi, you know who can't be far behind. This is, of course, an early draft. Why bother changing the world when you can put a fucking dent in the universe? I'm actually okay with this one. Especially if you combine it with cocktails in the EU. And finally, someone is honest enough to tell you that they have no idea how to actually do this. Here's a pro tip. No one who changed the world was ever afraid to say fuck. So it turns out that this is a really good time to change the world, which is good because the world is fucked. Here's another pro tip. When somebody tells you they want to change the world, there are 2 very important questions that you have to ask. How? And for whom? Because let me tell you, the difference between modern Uber and yesterday's Uber is pretty fucking negligible. And all of this talk in Silicon Valley about changing the world is nothing new. The service economy is nothing new. And there's nothing disruptive about rich people getting richer. It's the same bullshit that we've been doing in this country for centuries. So when the people at the top of the heap start talking about changing the world or disruption, you better believe that they don't want to change it too much. When you're benefiting from how the world is designed, why the hell would you change it? So when the fine young gentlemen of Silicon Valley start talking about changing the world, what they're really saying is that they'd like to shift some money and some power from these fine white gentlemen over to these fine white gentlemen for a little bit, and then a little bit later we'll shift it on back. Millionaires versus billionaires isn't class warfare. It's a scuffle at a Palo Alto Libertarian Party fucky pile. When those already in power start talking about changing the world, I feel like they found another way to squeeze just a little bit more out of those at the bottom. And ultimately, the only thing getting disrupted is which particular set of working people are getting screwed. Because again, the world is designed to work this way. So beware that you, with your desire to do good and make the world a better place, don't get sucked into the snake charmer's tent. His who is not you, and his how is not in your favor. So now that we've gotten our socialist bona fides out of the way, let's go back to our original question. Can designers change the world? Yes. Of course you can, but not for the reasons you think. Because I love you, I need to tell you something. You are not special. You have no unique properties. There is absolutely nothing about you that makes you different or better than anybody else. You are not a unique snowflake. And even if your 100 days personal passion project is the most heartfelt thing you've ever done, I guarantee that there are 10 million people out there just like you. I don't think design can change the world because it's special. I think design can change the world because it's not. Because anybody can change the world. And because the world isn't usually changed by special people. It's changed by ordinary people. Ordinary people who take it upon themselves to take a stand because they're trying to lead ordinary lives and something stupid gets in their way. The world is changed by seamstresses who don't want to give up their seat on the bus when they're trying to get home after a hard day's work. The world is changed by electricians just trying to earn a fair wage. The world is changed by girls who just want to go to school. The world is changed by kids who are upset about their bike being stolen. The world is changed by people who just want to spend an evening dancing. Dancing. The world is changed by people who don't want to get shot by the people who are supposed to be protecting us. The world is generally changed by people who just want to live their ordinary lives. The world is changed by people who just want to go home. Teachers can change the world all around the world, every day, in small ways, one kid at a time, and for little reward, other than something inside them tells them that this is the right thing to do. Doctors can and have changed the world. Journalists can and have changed the world. And yes, designers can and have changed the world. But it's not because we're especially capable of affecting change and improving the world around us. We're no different than anybody else. We're not special. We're ordinary. And we live by the same social contract. Yes, designers can change the world. But it's because we have the same responsibility as every other ordinary person. We can change the world because we don't get to opt out of changing the world. So the real question isn't whether we can change the world, but how. I got you covered. How to change the world. Here it comes. In 3 easy steps, not 2.5. 3 easy steps. We can do this. Y'all ready? To change the world, you have to get ignorant. You have to get ignorant to your place in it. Bear with me here. I want to talk about empathy a little bit. Empathy is a wonderful life skill. It allows us to understand things from other people's point of view. It's also how we double check that our work isn't falling into some ethical or moral black hole by attempting to see how it affects people who aren't us. And as empathetic as we might be, we are hopefully aware that the world worked out pretty well for us. After all, empathy is expensive and only available to people who have the time to feel it. Other people are just busy surviving. And we have to admit that the world, as designed, has worked more or less in our favor. But what if that wasn't the case? What if you woke up one day and you found yourself on the other end of the stick? Let's get philosophical about it. There's a philosophical concept called the veil of ignorance. This is what I mean by ignorance. The veil of ignorance is a way of determining whether something you're making sucks by allowing that you could end up in any possible relationship to it. Here's Wikipedia's excellent example. For a proposed society in which 50% of the population is kept in slavery, it follows that on entering that new society, there is a 50% likelihood that the participant would be a slave. Get what I'm talking about? The idea is that parties subject to the veil of ignorance will make choices based upon moral considerations, since they will not be able to make choices based on self or class interest. Now, I doubt that anybody here is an advocate for slavery, so let's bring this back to things that are more in our wheelhouse. Imagine, if you will, that the leadership team at Airbnb woke up tomorrow. Yeah, they're good looking. Imagine that they woke up tomorrow as a lower class immigrant family being served an eviction notice because their landlord did the math and decided that he could make more money by renting their apartment out as a short-term rental on Airbnb. You think at that point they would revisit that model they built? I would hope so. Or imagine that the teams that manage online harassment at any number of social networks, imagine they wake up one day no longer working at these companies and being contacted by stalkers and abusers. Imagine them having to go through the same process that their users have to go through every day to report shit like this. If any of these groups were given the chance to go back to their old lives for one day, I guarantee you that they would design their products differently. And that's what a veil of ignorance is all about. It's about designing a system where you could ultimately be getting the shit end of the stick. Is the single most important political and ethical concept in a designer's toolbox. Now, in hindsight, this is easy. But to do the right thing, we need to think of these things beforehand. We need to think of these things just a little bit more fairly. And how do we do that? Well, it's actually not that hard. I'll tell you in step 2. Step 2, you have to look like the world. Picture the following scenario. Imagine you're downtown and you're trying to get to an appointment, say a medical appointment. And your doctor's office is in a part of town that isn't served very well by public transportation. So you hail a cab, except this town doesn't have a lot of cabs. So you call dispatch, they send one over, it never shows up. This is frustrating as hell. You're now worried about missing your appointment. Now, what if we could solve this problem by putting more cars on the street? And say, let's say we could all solve the other side of this problem by turning private citizens into drivers. You've not only solved the dearth of cabs problem, but you found a way for people to make a little bit of extra scratch, possibly even earn a living driving other people around. All you need to do is to figure out a way to connect the people who need the rides to the people who offer the rides. And that's actually an easy part, especially for all of you. You just build an app. By all accounts, this is a good idea. You found a problem. You come up with a reasonable solution. You've met demand with supply. You found a way for people to earn a living, including yourself, hopefully. And certainly there's going to be hurdles along the way. You're going to have to deal with the taxi companies. You're going to have to deal with rules and regulations if you actually care anything about that. But there is nothing ethically wrong with this idea. Now, obviously, we're talking about Uber. By any account, a massive success story. Also, a company that seems to be in constant odds with the cities that they attempt to do business in. A company that New York Mayor Bill de Blasio practically went to war with. And a company with numerous cases of safety issues, harassment of customers, inadequate customer service, and a company with a leadership team that spends an inordinate amount of time with their foot in their mouth, which is doubly impressive when you consider that their heads are up their ass. So, how do ideas which start out helpful and by all measure ethically sound turn into companies with the ethical charm of a decapitated horse head bleeding out onto your silk sheets? Well, it's easy. You introduce people. Even easier, you introduce people with a very narrow set of life experiences. You hire designers who have the same life experiences, celebrate the same holidays, went to the same school, look like each other. In other words, white boys solving problems for white boys. They've never been harassed, so they don't think of solving for that problem. And even if they do, they don't solve it from a place of experience. They've never had a cab refuse to stop for them, so they don't solve for that problem. They've never been assaulted, so they don't solve for that problem. And it's too easy to think that these terrible things don't actually happen as often as they do, but they do. And we owe it. We owe it to the people that we are designing for to build our teams to reflect those people. Don't assume how a woman would behave in a situation. Hire women to design it. Don't assume how a black person would behave in a situation. Hire a black person to design it. Empathy is not enough. Empathy is less than enough. We need inclusion. Empathy is just a pretty word for exclusion. And the point isn't that any particular experience or classification makes you a better designer. It doesn't. People are just more informed about themselves than they are about others. And for now, the vast quantity of people in tech are white males. I know this is alarming. I know this is surprising news to a lot of you. Now, I'm a big fan of Michael Moore and his great big socialist heart. But Michael Moore is wrong on this one. We are not all Muslims. We can empathize, we can pretend, but at the end of the day, we're not going to have a presidential candidate calling to banish us from our own country because of our beliefs. This is cosplay, not real life. America is not a melting pot. America is 1,000 cultures, all attempting to somehow live together, hopefully in harmony, but not so much these days. But it's those differences. It's those differences that we need to celebrate, not the sameness. And we need the teams that make our shit reflect the people who we're making that shit for. And as the products and services we build get more and more enmeshed in that weird-ass, complicated social fabric, the more our teams need to reflect those differences. A diverse team isn't just about the diversity of race or gender. It's about the diversity of experiences, the diversity of needs, the diversity of thinking, and ultimately, the diversity of solutions. Our diversity is our strength, and we are idiots for not leveraging it. Step 3. To change the world, you got to be willing to design the right thing. Now, I had a professor in school who went on and on about how well the AK-47 was designed. He stressed that as designers, we should be able to appreciate an object's design on a purely aesthetic level. Well, fuck him. But let's look at the argument being made. The AK-47 is often cited as a well-designed object, not just by him, but by others. And this case is usually made by pointing out that the AK-47 is easy to use, maintain, take apart, modify, and manufacture. It's a model of simplicity, and the original design introduced in 1948 is still in use, even as they keep making more of these fucking things. Any of us would be proud to design something with that kind of legacy. Ease of use, ease of manufacturing, adaptability, simplicity. Holy shit, these are the cornerstones of design. But while somebody can make the case that an AK-47 or any other kind of gun or rifle is designed, nothing whose primary purpose is to take away life can be said to be designed well. And that attempting to separate an object from its function in order to appreciate it for purely aesthetic reasons or to be impressed by its minimal elegance is the coward's way of justifying the death they've designed into the world and the money with which they're lining their pockets. So what's the designer's role in all this? Well, design is an ethical trade. And yes, it's a trade done for money. But we have a choice in how we make that money. A designer possesses a certain skill set necessary to get something made and needs to properly assess how they put that skill set to use. Your role as a designer is to leave the world in a better state than you found it. You have a responsibility to design work that helps move humanity forward and helps us as a species to not only enjoy our time on Earth, but to evolve. Now, obviously, firearm design is an extreme example of this, and I doubt many of you will go on to become firearm designers, and fuck any of you that do. But how many of us are asked to design things that have the potential of causing harm to the people who come in contact with our work? Let me give you an example of how close to home this is. This news was revealed just a few days ago. And when this came out, as I said earlier, I went looking for an AK-47 on Facebook. 10 seconds later, I found this. There it is. I reported it to Facebook. An hour later, I got their reply. It doesn't violate our community standards. Now, following the massacre in Orlando, a few friends and I decided that we were going to start looking for guns on Facebook. You see, earlier this year, like I said, Facebook made a big stink about not allowing individual gun sales on the site. Problem is, they put absolutely no effort into it. They relied, in their own words, on users to police the site for them. Now, to date, we've reported upwards of 10,000 gun sales and gotten about 3,000 of them removed. We did this one at a time, following a pain-in-the-ass reporting flow that required about 4 clicks, a flow which I think I've seen about 5 different versions of at this point. Let me show you. All right, so here's somebody looking for a gun for sale. By the way, one of the things they're doing so that they try to get past the people searching for guns is they call them pew-pews. Pew-pew, sounds cute. So you hit the button up there, it says report post. This is what comes up. What's going on? It's annoying, not interesting. I think it shouldn't be on Facebook. It's spam. Where do you think the guns are under? Yeah, it shouldn't be on Facebook. But is that the clearest way to say that? No. Here's what comes next. What's wrong with this? It's rude, sexually explicit, harassment or hate speech. It's threatening, violent, or suicidal. Something else. Something else. You click on something else. It describes buying or selling drugs, guns, or adult products. Don't even get me started on the combination of those 3 things. Guns didn't even merit their own fucking checkbox. And then you submit it to Facebook for review, and then submit it to Facebook. A couple hours later, you get this. It doesn't violate our community standards. And we're all smart. We all work in this business. We know what something looks like when it's designed to be difficult to find. This is designed to be difficult to find. This is an anti-pattern. This is a dark art. And these anti-patterns are being designed. So to the designers of Facebook, I say, is this who you are? Is this how you want to be remembered? Because these things are going out with your name on them. You are enabling a death culture. Because when you have an opportunity to stop something and you opt out of it, when a machine becomes so onerous, you need to act. Your job is to act. Your job is to keep this from happening. And if you don't have the stomach for that, you're in the wrong game. Because people are counting on you to do that job, and you are letting them down. There comes a time when the machine becomes so onerous that you have to throw your body on the gears to stop it, and that time has come. How many of us are going to work on things like privacy settings at large social networks at some point? Are we going to think about how those settings are going to affect the people who come in contact with? How many of us are going to design things like drop cams and interfaces for drop cams? And are we going to think about the privacy violations that those might cause? How many of us are going to design things that put people in strangers' cars? Are we going to consider those passengers' safety as we design those solutions? And will we see it as our responsibility to make sure that those products are as safe as they possibly can be? And if we come to the conclusion that those products cannot be made safe, how many of us will see it as our responsibility to raise our hands and say, I'm not making this? Because if we truly want to change the world, we have to change how we've designed it. We have to change how we approach not just what we design, but how we design. We have to change not just how we design, but who is doing the designing. We have some seriously fucked up problems ahead of us, and we need to prioritize which of those problems we're solving. Greenland is melting. Children are being gunned down in schools. A great mass of stateless people is moving their way through Europe and dying as they do it. And it is my great shame that my own country, a country that was built with the sweat and blood of immigrants like my own parents, has turned their back on these people. We're building walls when we need to be building bridges. So no, you're not special. You're ordinary. And it's because you're ordinary that you don't get to opt out. So when you get back to work on Monday, I want you to hang up a map of Greenland on your wall. I want you to look at it. I want you to look at it every time you're deciding how you're going to spend the precious little time you have left on Earth. And I want you to make that decision not as a capitalist, not as a socialist, not as an American, not as a Republican, not as a Democrat, not as a designer, and most definitely not as a consumer. I want you to remember that you are a free people, free to choose how you spend the time you have left on Earth. And I implore you to use that time in the interest of making other people free. If you want to change how the world is designed, you have to change not just how we're designing it, but who's designing it. I want you to remember that you are lucky. You are lucky that the world was designed in your favor. And that luck carries with it the responsibility to help others who weren't so lucky. But most of all, I want you to remember that you are ordinary people bound by the same social contract as every other human on this planet, and that your job is to help and elevate those around you. And I wish you all the most ordinary of lives. Thank you.